Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. My name's Rebecca Edwards, and I'm the curator at arebyte Gallery. For those who don't know arebyte, we're a London-based arts organisation, and we support the development of artists working across digital and emerging art forms at the intersection of new technologies and contemporary culture. We have an on-site program as well as an online program, educational activities and experimental events and exhibitions that aim to broaden what we mean by the digital. So tonight I'm joined by Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, our current exhibiting artist and the founder of the new design congress, Cade Diehm. This is the first of 3 live stream events on Twitch that we're running in conjunction with Danielle's show at arebyte called She Keeps Me Damn Alive. And in this event, Danielle and Cade will talk about their favourite game cutscenes and FMVs, as well as stylistic approaches in gaming, methods for play, and the influence that different games have had on them as artists and gamers. Other topics in this series of talks that are happening at the beginning of February will include contemporary and queer gaming, interaction innovations, game criticism and theory, the history of gaming, and everything in between. So take a look on arebyte's website for the full lineup if that sounds interesting to you. Just by way of introduction, Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley is an artist living in Berlin. She creates work that seeks to archive the Black trans experience, and she uses technology to imagine our lives in environments that centre our bodies, those living, those that have passed, and those that have been forgotten. Cade Diehm is the founder of the New Design Congress, an international digital infrastructure research group which started in 2020. As I said, this event is part of Danielle's exhibition, She Keeps Me Damn Alive, which runs until the 18th of February 2022 at arebyte. So come and check it out if you're in London. Just quickly, I want to thank Benjamin from the New Design Congress for helping us stream this to their Twitch account too. For now, I'm going to hand over to Danielle and Cade, but if you have any questions throughout, please drop them in the Twitch stream chat and we'll get to them at the end.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the introduction. Is there anything you want to say about yourself, Cade, before you start as well?
Yeah, hello. It's great to be here. I mean, yeah, this is a topic that's really powerful to me. Part of the work that we do at New Design Congress is looking at systems of play and systems of aesthetics in a very primal way, in a sense, and looking at how these systems are structured and also how they're then experienced or perceived. So that's really amazing that we have this here tonight. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I just thought it'd be, to be honest, I've been looking and thinking about video game cutscenes and FMVs. I think since the first video game that was introduced to me. Sorry, and I think that was Spider-Man actually on the PlayStation 1. They had these really awful cutscenes, but I think the first time I saw like the difference between how cutscenes can be an artistic and stylistic choice, both within gameplay but also storytelling, was when I played this game on the PlayStation called, I think it was like Wing Commander. It was a Star Wars game,
Yeah.
and they used kind of like real life footage and made those into sprites almost. And so when you were playing it, it felt very much more grounded within the reality of the films rather than within the like reality of like a 3D world. And then ever since then, I've kind of been obsessed with just watching cutscenes and seeing how the cutscenes aid and sometimes don't aid the gameplay and the telling of the story or mood or setting.
It's really interesting that you say that. I think it's even before we begin, because we're going back into the history of video game cutscenes and their aesthetics. It's really amazing to remember that actually we don't use full motion video anymore in these things. We haven't for, gosh, I'd say probably over a decade now. But there was this time when the game engines and themselves and the cost, the economic cost and the computing cost to render customized scenes outside of gameplay was so expensive that we literally used these compressed blocky equivalents, and got like usually second-rate actors, or in many cases people like William Shatner and people like that to come and do, and Tim Curry, things like that. If you had if your game company had a budget to come and do these scenes. And of course, like the thing that jumps to mind besides Wing Commander is the other side of that. You had the space sort of action games, and on the other side you had things like Myst, where people had full motion video inside of books that were inside pre-rendered scenes.
Yeah. So should we jump into our first cutscene?
Please, what have you got for me?
Oh gosh. Okay. Out of all the choices, I think maybe the best one, or the one I want to start with, is the Clock Tower 2 intro. I love this intro so much. I love that cutscene so much. This cutscene is basically the foundation of a lot of the work I'm doing next. And it's just such an interesting cutscene, and it's supposed to set the mood of this game. And that's really rubbish. This game is awful. But the cutscene is so good. Like if the game was anything like the cutscene, it would be amazing. And it's so interesting that the PlayStation 1 had these FMVs at the beginning that were just mood setters, and they couldn't possibly dream of doing anything of what they just showed within the actual game. So they would just kind of set a real tone, using as much money as they possibly could to do this. But I thought this one had really interesting kind of editing choices, to be honest. And the kind of cuts to where it's just like still cuts of them walking, and then suddenly the shot of this demon figure. It's just so engrossing. It's really something that like pulled me in the first 1 minute and 40 of this game, and definitely made me play and regret playing the rest of this game.
There's a really interesting pacing thing here where you can see with the benefit of hindsight, you can see like the edges of the game developers. Like there's some scenes where there's some animation, and then there's like a lot of stuff where there isn't. I love that. I guess this is the beginning stages of these systems, right? Where like it's equal parts almost comic book frames or manga frames, and then like there's these like short, quick, sharp spaces of 3D animation alongside the FMV.
Right, and it's like and as well as for them, it's like a really good way to save data just using pictures rather than having to like stream out an entire moving image. But it's also so interesting how they weave that. Right, we need to make sure that we crunch and do not consume too much memory for this cutscene. But the way they've done it really makes you're not questioning why they used the picture there. You're not saying, they're saving money. It just completely fits within the theme and the kind of world they're building. I think it's just really brilliant. I just love that cutscene. I wish I could wake up every morning and watch it.
Well, you can. This is YouTube. It's infinitely available. But my question to you would be, I mean, I can see this very clearly. These kinds of techniques in your work too. Like, why does it speak to you so in this foundational way?
I think maybe this goes back to like my love for pre-rendered backgrounds, and using kind of cheap techniques to get something really polished. And for me, this is like a really amazing mix between saving costs, saving money, and saving time, and being exactly pinpoint on your vision. And so for me, they spent the time on the model of the girl, and modeling that scene, and the background is just like an image that's literally like just pasted there, which is why it looks a bit strange. But to be honest, for me, that makes it work even better because it really does bring your attention to her. And so for me, I kind of learn off those moments where I'm saying like, right, so you can have this way of saving data and saving time for yourself within thinking about how to construct something that tells the story that you need it to. And for me, this is just a very good, quick example of telling a full kind of story from the beginning, where it goes into this creepy forest to this upbeat action bit at the end. It's just a very well-rounded, almost like a music video. It's just very well-rounded for me. Yeah, and I feel like we have a lot of those back then, and maybe less of the well-rounded cutscenes now. We don't often have a cutscene at the beginning of a game like this.
Yeah. It's I want to bring one of my choices to you because I think it is exactly what you're talking about here, but one that's equally, I think, I think it's aesthetically quite different, but also very, very powerful and actually a bit of a triumph in a different kind of way. So if we could jump to Another World. You and I have talked a little bit about this, but Another World, for context here, is like a very beautiful narrative that was first produced on the Amiga. And I want to show the intro. The very first thing that you see, there's no menus. When people started playing this in the late 1980s, they loaded the game up, and rather than have a menu system or anything, they were just treated with the opening cutscene here. I love this. I love this so much. So what's great about this is like this is this first instance of like rotoscoping. It's an engine, some of it's polygons, things like that, but it's completely this is a single person's love affair, this adventure game. And it opens with, I mean, this video that we're watching on YouTube, you can't see it on the stream, but the video is called at 50 frames a second. That this opening sequence is happening, and it's really this incredible triumph in the same way I think as you have described the previous example. In this, it's the opposite. It's the embracing of the limitations to produce something that has stood the test of time. This is an iconic piece of animation, an iconic work of art by a single artist, one that's basically leaning directly into the technical limitations in a similar kind of philosophy as what we saw previously, but in this case, really owning it in a very specific way and still getting, gosh, a high quality, highly detailed, and very, very fast animation cutscene intro in very few resources. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, and this came out for like the Amiga, didn't it? And that I can't remember when that was, but it must be 89 maybe, something like this.
Late 80s, yeah.
Yeah, so like this is almost impossible. So I mean, when you booted up the computer, no game was doing anything like this. It's kind of like the first cinematic game, other than Dragon's Lair, which was in the arcades. And I think actually the designer was really inspired by Dragon's Lair, but they didn't want to. They couldn't do it on the Amiga, basically, and they were like, "How do I do something as cinematic as that, but in my own kind of style?" And yeah, this is amazing. Like, it may not look amazing today, but this would be impossible if someone showed a concept video back in the day and said, "I want to make this," they probably would have said, "This is impossible. You can't do it. There's no way you can actually do this." And
even
the way
I was just going to say, like, even the idea of having like different camera angles and like the very much the cinematics telling of the story is just like unheard of at this time.
Right, and the way that this is done is so interesting. I watched the explanation video on how the characters are actually drawn, because they're actually all polygons, and it's something to do with like the Amiga could fill in the points between each other, something like that. But yeah, this is another example of, and I think we spoke about this, like the first time like a video game piece became just art, like just generally art. And playing through it was such a cinematic experience that it's kind of like all this kind of stuff like Death Stranding. And actually Hideo Kojima has said this is one of his biggest influences when it comes to his career. And so like all that kind of like lineage has started from games like this, which kind of pioneered cinematics within gaming.
It's also great because it's very subtle here. The seamlessness between cutscene and the actual gameplay itself is something that even a lot of AAA titles today really suffer from. They're unable to move seamlessly between them. What I really love about this, and we'll explore some other examples of this too, is when you embrace the limitations or what you have, and you make the cutscenes very intentionally. What you get is the seamlessness that's not. I don't think it's appreciated as much as perhaps it should be. This idea of knowing when to take control from the player and when not to take the control, and how there's questions of autonomy and aesthetics and things like that related to that fundamental question. And this game from 1989, I think, or whatever, is like this first example of something where the difference between a cutscene and a playable area is completely seamless.
Mm. Yeah, and I kind of want to jump into an opposite example of that.
Yeah, go for it.
Which is
Please.
Parasite Eve. And so if we could play the Parasite Eve opening, and this opening I love this opening. It's ridiculous, but it's kind of like an iconic opening. makes me laugh every time.
The melodrama.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh my god. It's really intense.
Like the best solo ever. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you
Yeah.
can stop it now.
Oh my god.
But like, so for me, that one's so. I love that cutscene. I think it's amazing. But I also think it's amazing how they insist on doing half the play in, no dialogue, just text, and you just have to tell it everything for the body language. And then there's halfway when she's singing, it splits into this, full motion graphics to kind of show how, kind of like detail up how terrible everything is and how awful and horrible this event is. And I think it's a really interesting technique. I do think it's like a really interesting technique to use very low detail graphics where you have to kind of use your mind to understand exactly what's going on and then show something extremely detailed and then go back to those low details. And I think there's something to be explored there in having those two differentiating ways of presenting ideas.
There's a component of it too that plays into the idea of these subtle cues between engine and pre-render, which can communicate to the players from a directorial perspective, right? Like it's a pretty intense shift, and it happens right at a particular point where you begin to focus in on the villain, I guess, of the game. That's a profoundly interesting parallel there between, or the contrast between the what is this, like a Capcom game engine? It looks like what Resident Evil 1 is built off of, almost, versus the 3D render afterwards. Really heavy, really heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. But I just do think there's something to be tapped in there. This kind of, I mean, we did talk about Final Fantasy VII, but we decided not to show one. But it's kind of similar in the fact that I'm very interested in using as little polygons as possible to tell a story, to like have something that's very low detail, have a very high emotional impact. And for me, this is kind of using two techniques to try and do that, to say like, right, we're going to chuck a lot of detail at you so that these low models now have so much impact afterwards. Like if you saw the character model of this person now, you would be fearful of her because you know what she can do just by singing. And that's really interesting to set up this kind of story and dynamic for the player of this very low detailed character that you would never fear originally.
Yeah, who now has a heavy, dangerous tone to her. Yeah, I do think that combines with the idea of like the blurring. We talked in the previous cutscene about like how Another World it blurs the cutscene with the gameplay because it's exactly the same. Whereas here, there's this like that foreshadowing we just talked about, and the heaviness, or the ability to then turn the villain into a villain by moving into a higher detail. I love this idea of those shifts being that foreshadowing, and embracing that a little bit, because I mean, for quite honestly, they could have kept it with the same low poly earlier examples. It's interesting that they went into that for certain scenes rather than the whole thing. Yeah, really, really good.
So what's your next cutscene?
My next cutscene actually is quite similar to the same kind of framing that I was talking a little bit about before. What I want to do now is talk a bit about this game's Sanitarium, which is a very, very little known game. It's an adventure point and click, based, I think it was MS-DOS in like the mid 90s. And it's of that era of like pre-rendered everything. In a sense, it's like what you're looking at here right now, but a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little bit more towards the art style of like Myst and things like that. And the reason why I want to show this off is I want to show, again, I'm interested in these, like, as you are, Danielle, in the barriers between gameplay itself and the narrative, like the on rails narrative. So if we jump over to Sanitarium and have a look, we need to go to. Hang on. We're starting from the start. We're not starting from the start. Hang on a sec. Yeah. Just going to. Sorry, I'm going to pull open the right bit here. One moment. Looking for 11:49-ish. We just scroll. Yeah, 11:40. A little bit. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Cool.
But where are they now? It's some strange kind of key. But a key to what?
This is an intro to the game, and you've basically woken up with your head in bandages in a mental asylum that's like looks positively medieval, and it's a very confusing space. It's like very disorientating, but it's an adventure game, so everything is like highly detailed in terms of its like cutscenes and so forth, and its iconography. And so once you've figured out the first puzzle, you come up to the angel here and you talk to them.
It is so dark. Oh, my home, once bright tower, what has become of you?
You're alive. Am I going mad?
Listen, hear the cries of the children. The innocent are dying, and you only think of yourself. Can you not see the light of heaven has dimmed?
What can I do?
Seek the truth.
So this is great because you were talking before about like these emotional moments, if you like. We're both looking at these places now of like the beginnings of games and like these briefings which set the tone. What I love about this is that like this is kind of the inverse in the sense that like once again looking at how the engine matches what's there. Of course, what's interesting is that the full motion video in this case, and you could see it from the scan lines, actually made this kind of worse. But the character model is very similar to the character model that you see as the playable part on the screen. And what's powerful about it is this reward exploration cycle, right? Where like it's when these relatively static, I mean, this looks like Diablo, right? Like it's a very particular structured aesthetic. But then the payoffs in each of these sections are these ways in which the game takes the existing assets and then then expands upon them, and you get this reward for playing the story in a certain way. And it's this period where like the limitations of the space and the limitations of I mean space in the context of the computer and its resources itself, and also the creators of it have matched. They kind of have caught up with the actual ability to create these sprites and these graphics. And so what you have here is instead of these seamlessness, it's kind of in some ways the opposite, but the seamlessness comes in the fact that it looks very similar from both the cutscenes and from the game itself. I really like this way in which the inverse of what we were talking about is true, where the payoff and reward is the richness of the environment that comes in and the storytelling that emerges from that, but the assets are the same.
Yeah, like something you said was interesting, that I used to really feel when I was younger, is that sometimes cutscenes are gifts in games, and they like show, if you're walking around a town like this and it's quite regimented kind of graphics, it's isometric, you're only seeing your character do certain kinds of animations. And when you trigger a certain cutscene to change the world, it feels like a gift. It feels like the thing you've been searching for the whole time. And that's something I miss, I think, is that like sometimes like a cutscene was the thing you were searching for the whole time, rather than actually the end of the puzzle or the solution, or like beating the boss. It's actually like seeing this character that you see in a very regimented way do things that you didn't expect them to actually be able to like physically rendered out.
Yeah, or in a sense, seeing the play space as like a form of narrative purgatory, or either purgatory in the sense of like using the stasis to push the player forward to continue to unlock the story, or an inverse would be as like an environmental scene setting, like what's happening here, where you're basically being introduced after the opening cutscene to the space that you're in, this really surreal, what looks like again a Midwestern kind of slightly religious American space. And it's a combination of like the lack of, or the repetition of the isometric design, combined with the visceral nature of the aesthetics that come between those cutscenes.
And so before we go to questions, I kind of want to show the Death Stranding one.
You want to show the Death Stranding one? Oh my
Yeah.
god! Yeah, let's do it. So I wanted to show. This is a pretty long scene, but the Death Stranding one is really great. I have a very particular thing. This is kind of like, to me, combining both of what we're talking about here, and I'd love to hear what you think about it too, Danielle. So can we jump over to Death Stranding, please? Yeah.
Such a good cutscene. It's just amazing. No one directs really like Hideo Kojima right now. He is definitely like a league in his own.
Yeah, so what I love about this, for those who haven't played Death Stranding, I've written about this at NDC, New Design Congress earlier, but this game itself is a game where you, as a player, the gameplay mechanics are walking through an Icelandic barren environment. And what I love about it is Kojima is able to take these, again, this is a space where like the game itself looks and feels very similar to what you see between the cutscenes. But the difference here is that like what Kojima is able to do, not always, there's 11 hours worth of cutscenes in this particular game, but what he's able to do is to make this character who's a sort of, in a sense, lost in this very strange world. The cutscenes work best when Sam Bridges, its main character, is an observer, is someone who, having control from the player, would actually not produce a better outcome, where the idea of him kind of stuck observing is far more powerful.
No, I think I mean this game kind of came out at the perfect time. It came out during COVID as well, and it's all about isolation and people not, Sam Bridges, that's the character that Norman Reedus plays. He doesn't like being touched. He likes to be away from everyone. He's got something called, I think it's agoraphobia. And he essentially is a postman, and he delivers post. And
He's an Amazon delivery man, yeah.
Literally. And what this game does really well is like make you do those, like makes you do those really hard, laborious tasks. Like usually walking within a game from one side to the other thing, there's usually a lot of things to speed that up, and it's not hard to do. But in this game, just walking forwards is difficult, and you can trip over the tiniest rock on the floor and lose all your Amazon packages and then fail the mission. Everyone's very disappointed with you. But I feel like this is really interesting for Hideo Kojima because the pacing of his cutscenes are never just to get from the next point. They're always to like set up something and let you sink into the pace of what's going on and the pace of the character themselves. Like if the character has to, swim across half the ocean, Hideo Kojima will probably show you that, so you can also experience what it's like to swim across half the ocean. And I find this, this is a game with 11 hours of cutscenes, and the gameplay almost feels like one of those cutscenes. It's just as like laborious and slow, and takes its time with you. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting example of a game not really caring about wanting people to enjoy playing it at all, and instead just focusing on time as just a real important thing, saying this is a time sink, and this person spends most of the time walking across places just to give you an Amazon package. It's really interesting. Do we have any questions also, Rebecca?
Hey, so we have actually quite a lot of comments.
Wow.
I asked in the chat, what are people's favorite cutscenes? And yeah, there's quite a few interesting ones. When Marcus has to shoot Maria in Gears of War 2, Dismal Swamp said that they cried, but then they go on to say, oh, actually, Dom shoots his own wife. Damn. There's stuff about Soul Calibur 2. Loads of stuff. I've just asked if there's any questions, but I think maybe I'd like to ask a question, or maybe it's more of a comment, because for me, I have a really interesting relationship to cutscenes, because when I was growing up, I have a twin brother, and he would always have all of the consoles. He would be the one to have the games, and so for me, my experience of games was through the cutscenes, because the other parts of him playing the game with his friends, I could never really hear. They would be screaming, they would be shouting. But when the cutscenes came on, I mean, they either like skipped them if they could, or they watched them. So for me, that was really where I got the gist of what was happening. And I think it's really nice to see, especially in Death Stranding, that they really take the effort, and it really is part of the game. It's not just like a little like side note to kind of progress you. Like it really is part of the game. So that was really nice to kind of to hear you both speak about that.
I love that though, because it's like it's so interesting that, because I have a kind of similar experience when I was younger. I would try and skip past every single cutscene because I just thought it was irrelevant,
The baby down Norman Reedus's throat. Yeah, it's surreal.
And it's really interesting to hear you talk about it from like a watching point of view, because I actually did that quite a lot with my sister, where I'd watch my sister play games. But it's so interesting how, like, if you're watching a cutscene, like the dynamic changes of like, okay, let me actually like watch this. Like you treat this very differently to gameplay, and that's like it's like a different mode of experiencing a game. It's like you switch into like the passive kind of like, let me enjoy these images wash over me, and then I'll get back to screaming when the game starts up again, because that's when I'm involved. So yeah, that's a really interesting comment. It brings up a lot of memories for me as well.
I think I have a question for you, Danielle.
Yeah.
So your work really bounces between the idea of gameplay and very, very deliberate storytelling. Where's that tension point for you personally between cutscene and gameplay?
So I want something. So for me, I should have used it actually. A great example of this is Telltale's The Walking Dead. And that's the kind of point where I want to get to, in which the whole game feels like something that you actively want to watch, but at the same time, everything you're watching is affected by you. So for me, I want to get to a point where the cutscene is the gameplay and the cutscene at the same time. And so the moments you slip into passiveness are the moments where the game takes as much information as it can from you to then change the events of what you're seeing. So almost I'm looking at like eye tracking and like heat scanning and all this kind of stuff, just to kind of use them as inputs, to kind of use cutscenes as a way to pretend that you're not playing, but actually to use them as a gathering point, because people do watch cutscenes quite actively rather than gameplay. It's really interesting. And so, yeah, that's the kind of the way I see them, as like I kind of want to blend the two together, and so you don't know when you're playing.
That definitely comes across in the arebyte show, especially with the introduction. I've noticed a lot of people fail the game instantly because they're not watching that cutscene, that intro, where you're saying, don't shoot. Like it says it on the screen, it says, don't shoot, don't shoot. But people think that you can skip it, so they start shooting it and then they fail the game. So that, for me, that's a really interesting thing to have in an exhibition where there's a whole emphasis on interaction and on play, but you've really got to be tuned into that play. It's not just like, okay, let's skip through all of this stuff and then I can get to the play. Like you're already playing, you've already picked up the gun, the controller, like you're already there. Yeah, it's interesting to see how people play in that way in a gallery space, for sure.
There's a game here that really ties into what Danielle is talking about. I'm going to drop the trailer in. It's come out in the last 9 months. It ties in this idea of like the observational thing. This would be like, actually, I would love to have. Yeah, let's do it. Let's drop it in there. This is a game called Before Your Eyes, and what it does is it uses your webcam to watch you blink. So
Oh yeah,
Benjamin,
I know this game.
yeah. So the idea here, if we can pull
You
open
like
the
go
trailer.
forward in time.
Yeah. Basically, the idea is that you have died, and it's like a person's story of them like rolling through their life is flashing before their eyes, and every scene that you play, you have to wait. You have to not blink as long as possible. Yeah, we can unmute it. Please unmute it. Yeah.
I want to see exactly what made you so absolutely great. If you understand what I'm saying, blink over my hand here. Just think back.
Look at that
To the
sun.
very beginning. The first thing that you can remember. Every time you blink, you're going to jump forward in time. Could be a second,
Ooh, that's good.
could be 5 years.
But that's enough for
We have to make him do this every birthday.
me. That's a great idea.
I don't know what I'd do without old Benny. It's Chloe, your neighbor.
But understand,
I love
no
it.
matter how much you like it, you're not going to be able to stay, all right?
With your mother gone, I'm hoping to finally live without all the clutter.
It's over.
What's going on with Benjamin Quinn?
You're ashamed of something. Something so terrible, you're trying to blink right past it.
Close your eyes, Ben.
So I'm gonna ask you again. Well, no matter how painful it gets, I'm gonna send you there to start from the very beginning. I need you to remember. And just try to enjoy it this time.
So a little bit more twee than the other stuff we were looking at, but I've heard really beautiful things about this. And I think the mechanism of a game that only progresses when you blink, which is something that all humans have to do at some point, is a profoundly difficult way of, a challenging way of experiencing cutscene and gameplay at the same time.
Yeah, this is a really good case study for me.
As soon as you said it, like that you were looking at heat sync, like heat and eye tracking and stuff, I was like, oh my god, this is perfect. It's. I've not played it yet. I really want to play it. I kind of want to play it on stream, but I have a suspicion that I would like cry on stream. Don't really want to do that. I mean, it is a bit sort of like twee, as I said, but it sort of looks like it's been written to like really tug at your heartstrings a bit.
It's gonna be perfect. And so yeah, do we have any questions before we end?
There are no more questions, unfortunately.
No, that's fine.
That's fine.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cade, for doing this.
Thank you. Someone said the opening of Grist is great, which is super cool.
It's
Absolutely.
a beautiful game. It's a beautiful game.
Oh my god. Yeah. We could have spent hours just doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, like I feel like we're due another one. Like there's so many cutscenes that'd be amazing to watch. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. And everyone should check out New Design Congress. And thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you so much, Benjamin, for being secret help goblin behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, bye guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye everyone.